Welcome to the realm beneath the surface, where heartbreak is not failure, but a message from the soul. If the stories here awaken something in you, then subscribe, not just to this channel, but to the deeper work your psyche is already calling you to do. Not every love begins with longing. Some begin with a wound, quietly reopened by the one who feels most like home. There is a kind of love that feels like drowning, and still, we swim toward it. Not because we don't see the danger, not because we are naive, but because something deeper than logic is pulling us under. We call it fate. We call it passion. We even call it love. But beneath those names lies a darker truth. We return to what wounds us, not because we want to suffer, but because suffering has become the only way we know to feel real. It begins subtly. You meet someone. They are familiar, too familiar. There's a tension in their voice, a chill in their gaze, a pull in your gut you mistake for chemistry. You think it's attraction, but it's memory. Memory of a place inside you that once ached to be held and was not. A place where approval was scarce and love had conditions. Where tenderness was rationed and affection was earned, and something in you still wants to earn it. Carl Jung warned us that what is not made conscious will manifest as destiny. But what he didn't say, or perhaps only whispered, is that destiny often looks like romance, and romance often disguises a wound. There is a reason the same kind of person keeps showing up in your life, wearing new names but carrying old knives. There is a reason you keep leaving only to return, and a reason you tell your friends you're done and still stay. That reason is not weakness. It is the shadow, the part of you that never stopped believing love must hurt to matter, the part that confuses punishment with passion, the part that has not yet been seen. And until that part is brought into the light, you will mistake trauma for intimacy. You will call pain your home. We are not rational in love. We are mythic. We fall not into relationships, but into reenactments. We choose lovers not by logic, but by wound. And the wound, when left unhealed, demands repetition. Again and again, we are drawn to the very thing that broke us, hoping, this time, the ending will change. But healing is not found in repetition. Healing begins when we step out of the dream and ask, what in me is choosing this? Not to shame it, but to understand it. This story is not a warning. It is a mirror. A descent into the unconscious realm, where love becomes self-sacrifice, where longing becomes punishment, and where, if we dare to look, we may finally find the child within us who has waited a lifetime to be chosen, not by another, but by ourselves. Her name was Elise, 38 years old, elegant, educated, effortlessly composed, the kind of woman people imagined had long escaped the gravity of personal chaos. She curated beauty for a living, gallery exhibitions, museum installations, architectural fragments of forgotten empires. She could walk through marble ruins and feel the language of centuries humming beneath her fingertips. But when it came to love, Elise was still speaking a dialect forged in childhood wounds. To the outside world, she was luminous. Inside, she lived in fragments. There had been 5 major relationships in the past 12 years. 5 men with different names, voices, and occupations. But beneath the surface, all of them spoke the same cold gospel. You will never be quite enough. They didn't say it aloud. They didn't have to. It was in their delayed replies, their weaponized silences, their subtle diminishment of everything she loved. It was in the way they made her feel excessive for needing warmth, dramatic for wanting to be chosen. Each man had arrived as a savior, each left as a stranger, and each time, Elise told herself, "This is the last time I disappear for someone." But it never was, because the truth was unbearable. Some part of her was still choosing them, not for who they were, but for what they echoed. In her 9th therapy session, her voice wavered as she uttered his name, Father, not in anger, in distance, as if recalling a sculpture from a cold museum hall, admired but untouched. He had been a professor of classics, formidable, distant, a man who praised essays but never embraced his daughter, who taught her about the tragedies of Sophocles but never asked how her day went, whose approval was as rare as sunlight in December. Elise remembered a night, age 7, when she won a citywide art contest. She ran home, heart thudding like wings. He looked at the certificate, nodded once, and said, "You spelled your name incorrectly." That was all. The girl, she was folded inward that night, and something in her decided, if I perfect myself, maybe he'll see me. So she did. She became immaculate. Academic awards, poised speech, flawless posture, no room for error, no room for need. By the time she was a woman, she no longer sought love. She sought redemption. Every relationship became a test. Will this man finally love the parts of me that my father ignored? And when he didn't, she didn't leave. She tried harder. Not because she lacked self-worth, but because her worth had been fused to struggle. This is what Jung called a father complex, a psychic inheritance where love is fused with coldness, where the masculine becomes a mirror of neglect, and where every partner is secretly a proxy for unfinished grief. She was not attracted to these men. She was haunted by them, because the child in her still believed, if I can make this one stay, the first one will come back. This is the core of repetition compulsion, the psyche's effort to master a trauma by reenacting it. But trauma cannot be mastered through reenactment. It must be metabolized, digested, felt, and ultimately released. But Elise hadn't yet reached that place. She was still in the cycle, still hoping for a different ending to a story that had never truly begun. And in that cycle, the shadow ruled, unseen, unquestioned, patient. The shadow is not chaos. It is choreography. It scripts our longing. It casts our lovers. It arranges the pain perfectly until we are ready to wake up. And Elise, though she didn't know it yet, was beginning to stir. Elise was not merely unlucky in love. She was ritualizing her pain. Each relationship was a reenactment, an unconscious ceremony. Not because she enjoyed suffering, but because suffering had become her way of proving she was still alive. To the untrained eye, it looked like low self-esteem. To the soul-aware, it was the shadow in full command. Jung described the shadow as everything we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves, not just darkness, but disowned need, stifled anger, long-abandoned desire. It is not the villain within, it is the unloved. And in Elise, the shadow had taken on the shape of a woman who believed she deserved to be punished for wanting to be loved. The punishment was subtle, a slow erosion of self, a quiet agreement to accept the bare minimum, a lifetime of translating cruelty as complexity, absence as mystery, indifference as depth. But the truth was simpler. These men were not deep. They were emotionally absent, and she had mistaken emotional absence for the familiar gravity of her father's cold approval. The shadow had hidden this from her, as it always does, because to see it would mean to face a harder truth, that she was not fated to suffer. She was conditioned to believe suffering was her price of entry into love. This belief formed early, in that still, silent room where the child Elise waited for her father's gaze to soften, and it never did. In that silence, a narrative formed. I am too much. I must become less. I am not enough. I must work harder. I am unlovable. I must suffer to be accepted. In the unconscious, faithful as a scriptwriter bound to ancient myths, preserved this belief into adulthood. Every partner was a cast member. Every heartbreak, a scene. Every return, a desperate rewrite. But no matter how the lines changed, the ending remained the same. Abandonment, emptiness. Elise, alone in her apartment, apologizing to herself for ever hoping it would be different. Jung taught that the shadow, when denied, doesn't simply disappear. It projects. It chooses our lovers, writes our dreams, drives our compulsions, and then disappears behind the curtain, leaving us to wonder, why does this keep happening to me? But it is not happening to you. It is happening through you, through the unconscious, through memory, through the unspoken contract we sign in childhood. I will play small if you promise to stay. I will not ask for much if you let me be near you. I will accept pain if you give me a reason to feel real. The punishment is never random. It is tailored to the shape of our unhealed need. And for Elise, that shape was carved by absence, an absence she kept trying to reverse by repeating it. But repetition cannot rewrite the past. It can only exhaust the soul. It would take something more, something dangerous, to end the pattern. A descent, a confrontation, a turning inward toward the very part of herself she had spent a lifetime trying to prove wasn't broken. And that descent was coming. It came not as thunder, but as quiet. A stillness too sharp to ignore. A silence so exact it became a mirror. Elise sat at the edge of his bed, barefoot, wrapped in the soft cruelty of morning after sheets. Her partner, the most recent echo, was scrolling through his phone, absently nodding as she spoke about her mother's worsening illness. He said nothing, not out of malice, out of disinterest. That was the wound, not violence, neglect. The kind of absence that had no edges, only the slow suffocation of never being seen. In that moment, Elise didn't cry. She didn't plead. She simply saw. Not him. Herself. The child version, still curled up at the bottom of a staircase, still waiting for her father's footsteps, still hoping today would be the day he noticed her. This man wasn't her partner. He was a projection, a vessel for an old narrative. And in that precise, brutal stillness, she saw the cycle, the longing, the pursuit, the temporary warmth, the sudden chill, the apology she always made for existing. A single thought dropped into her like a stone into deep water. I am done begging to be seen. It wasn't a decision. It was a rupture, not an act of anger, but of sacred refusal. She stood up, gathered her things with the calm of someone returning from a war they didn't know they were fighting. She didn't say goodbye. There was no need. The exit had already happened inside her. That night, Elise did something she hadn't done since childhood. She wrote a letter, not to him, to her, to the 7-year-old girl in ballet shoes, staring at the doorway, to the teenager who learned to outthink desire, to the woman who kept calling pain her destiny. She wrote, "You did nothing wrong. You don't have to earn love by erasing yourself. You are not unworthy because he didn't know how to love you. You can stop now. You can rest." That letter was not a performance. It was a funeral, a burial of the identity she had carried like a cross. The pleaser, the good girl, the one who waits. Jung called this death of false identity the night sea journey, a mythic descent into the waters of the unconscious, where the ego dissolves and the true self begins to rise. But what no one tells you is how lonely that death feels. Elise felt it. The days that followed were hollow, not from grief for the man, but from the collapse of the illusion. There were no fireworks, only fatigue, only the soft, haunted ache of a life lived too long in someone else's image. But even in that ache, something was changing. She no longer rushed to explain herself. She stopped apologizing for speaking plainly. She felt the stirrings of a new inner truth, one that did not need to be palatable. This was not confidence. It was the slow return of sovereignty. She was not healed, but she was home. For the first time in her life, Elise was not waiting to be loved. She was learning how to stay with herself, even in the silence, even in the dark, even in the unbearable absence of anyone else's validation. And that was the beginning. Healing does not feel heroic. It feels mundane, uneventful, almost disappointingly quiet. Elise didn't rise into a new life like a phoenix. She simply stopped lying to herself. She stopped calling emotional distance mystery. She stopped mistaking inconsistency for chemistry. She stopped apologizing for her needs and began listening to them like sacred instructions. She walked through her days slowly, refused to explain her solitude, let go of people whose presence required self-erasure. In place of adrenaline and ache, she began to feel nothing, not numbness, peace. The nervous system, finally unwinding from decades of performance. The psyche, no longer reenacting childhood scripts. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And Elise was no longer seeking love. She was becoming it. The old pattern, the hunger to be chosen by those who withheld, had rotted in her hands. Its rituals felt absurd now. Why perform for someone incapable of recognition? She would still ache. The grief didn't vanish, but the spell was broken. The trance was over. The girl who once bent herself into silence for a father's nod now stood in a room of her own voice, unapologetic, unaccompanied, unafraid. She had not found a better man. She had become a different woman, and the pattern no longer recognized her. So now, the myth is yours, not Elise's, not Jung's. Yours, because if you're honest, you've met them too, haven't you? The ones whose coldness made your warmth feel like a flaw. The ones who mirrored not your potential, but your past. You didn't fall in love. You fell into memory. And now the question is not, why do they hurt me? It is, why do I keep choosing this shape of pain? Why do I need to be punished to feel alive? Whose silence am I still trying to soothe through someone else's presence? The child in you still waits, not for love, but for permission to stop begging for it. This is the soul's task, not to find the right person, but to reclaim the self who believed they weren't enough. So ask yourself, who must you stop asking to love you? Not because they won't, but because they can't. Because they were never meant to. Because they were only the echo, not the origin. You cannot heal by repeating the wound. You cannot become yourself by abandoning yourself. So tonight, sit in the silence. Let it ache. Let it hollow you out. And when it does, listen. The voice that rises will not be theirs. It will be yours. Older than memory, wiser than shame. The voice that says, you do not have to suffer to deserve love. You never did. Thank you for walking this descent with me, for witnessing the wound and the wisdom buried inside it. Until we meet again in the next shadow, the next story, the next turning of the soul.